Hello, everyone. I'm Susan Nash, AAPG. Absolutely delighted to be here tonight, and we have a great program, New Trends in Drilling and Reservoir Modeling. What I like about what we're doing today is the fact that we have the opportunity to talk about new technologies that are making our transition possible. So basically what we're doing is talking about how you can take advantage of new technologies and how important they are right now as the prices are increasing and we seek to be more efficient and cleaner as we produce, but then also with an eye on developing transferable skills for the future. So that's part of the entire mission of AAPG. And so I'm really happy to introduce our leaders today, so our leadership. So I'll just a quick note of the program we have in general is we have 4 speakers. We have John Holbrook, and we have Igor Kuvaev, and we have Qiang Wang, and we also have Bryan McDowell. So they will be speaking on our technical side of things. And then for our leadership, today we have Gretchen Gillis, who is our president, and we have Julian Chenin, who's with the Sustainability Committee. We have Mike Fingel Davis with EMD, and we also have, did I mention John Holbrook is speaking?
Yeah,
Okay. It's like the names are moving, and I thought, did I mention him? Anyway, I'm glad I did. And we have Meredith Faber, DPA. So anyway, let's just start with a few words from Gretchen. And hello, Gretchen.
Good evening, Susan. Thanks for the invitation to be here tonight. And I'm really excited about this program. These are really big times for AAPG and the industry. And it's really great to see so many people turning out tonight, even as we are in the final innings of the Houston-Boston game. And from what I can hear in the next room, things are actually heating up a bit. Let me say there's a whole lot going on in AAPG, and it's really important that as we consider the future of our organization and how we move into the coming decades, it's important that members do a few things. One is to make sure that your dues are paid. So the best way to do this is to go into aapg.org, find the member directory, log in, click on your profile, and make sure that you have your dues paid so you're in good standing and not suspended. Make sure that your email address is correct. And if you're not receiving email messages from AAPG, please check your email preferences to make sure that you have opted in to receive communications. And I say this because there are a whole lot of things happening. First of all, a whole bunch of great meetings and events that we're planning for the early parts of next year, but also because of the very important strategic discussions with SPE about the possible merger. We would like to keep members as informed and engaged as we can. And so making sure that you are paid up in your dues and receiving email is terrific. You'll also see if you go to aapg-spe-merger.org that there's a bunch of new information that was posted this week about the progress of the discussions, including a message from SEG. So I don't want to take too much time, but please make sure to stay engaged. If you have any questions, please email me. If you don't have my email address, there are lots of other people who seem to have it because I get plenty of email. And I'd like to hear from you, and I want to make sure that you stay engaged. And let me hand it back to Susan with my great thanks for all that you're doing, and especially these pivoting sessions that are so much fun.
Oh, I think I accidentally muted you, Gretchen.
Okay,
Sorry
I'm finished.
No, I'm so sorry. I was clicking on letting somebody in, and it's moved, and I muted you. I was like,
That's
sorry.
okay. You can mute me, but just keep letting people in.
Anyway, so you might want to repeat your last few words.
Oh, I was just going to say, stay engaged. Contact me if you have questions or concerns. And I'm looking forward to another great night of pivoting. So I'm going to mute now.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. And I just want to take a few moments. We'll just have a few moments from some of our division leaders and committees, and they're speaking to you about the ways that you can get involved and network. So I'd like to start with Julie.
Thanks for the really kind invitation, Susan, and also for putting on these fantastic series of talks. I very much enjoy them, and they're really, really insightful. Hi, everyone. My name is Julian. I'm part of the AAPG Sustainable Development Committee, and our goal is to broadly communicate the positive technical, economic, and social benefits within the petroleum industry, as well as their collective efforts towards sustainable development. As we move forward into the variable energy future, our duty as geoscientists, which has never changed, is to always incorporate sustainability along the way. And it's perfect for today's discussion, where we look at how we can repurpose wells in different reservoirs for options such as energy storage or geothermal purposes. So it's a pleasure being here. Thank you again. And I will note that we have launched a podcast series with the Energy Insights on AAPG. And we just released our latest episode with Katie Menert from Ally Energy, where we talk about diversity and inclusivity, especially within our energy future as we go forward. It's now available on Spotify. And yeah, we hope you give it a listen and join us. And thanks again.
Great, thank you. So Meredith Faber, would you like to talk to us briefly about DPA?
Sure. Good evening, student, and good morning, evening, and afternoon, of whichever you may be in your specific time zone. I am Meredith Faber. I'm the immediate past president of the Division of Professional Affairs. And I'd like to thank Susan and all the speakers for this wonderful session that you all have organized. These have been a great boon, I think, to AAPG's programming over the several months, and for Aramco for sponsoring these as a great gift, I think, to the association. DPA is presently engaged in a number of initiatives that we're hoping to blend with the new strategic initiatives that the organization itself is undertaking. If you're interested in hearing more about what we're up to and how to get more involved, you can visit us on LinkedIn as well as Facebook, and as always on the AAPG main page. But if you have any specific things that you would like to speak to either President Don Burdick or myself, you can reach us at aapgdpa@gmail.com. And we have, like I said, lots of programs that we're interested in expanding, and we're looking for new volunteers who are willing to get down and dirty with everything that we have going on. Thank you, Susan.
Oh, that's great. And so finally, we'll talk to Mike Fingel Davis and say just a few things about EMD and also just how it benefits members.
Thank you, Susan. Again, this is a great series. I don't need to say it again, and like everybody else said. I mean, it's awesome. I'm glad you're doing this, so thank you. I am the president-elect for the Energy Minerals Division, and for those of you who are not aware of what that division encompasses, it basically covers, I'll just give the quick overview. It's like bitumen and heavy oil, coal bed methane, energy economics and technologies, gas hydrates, geothermal, tight oil, uranium, and one of the main, I guess, important items that fall under our category is the critical minerals. And when you're discussing things like we're going to do tonight, and looking for how you can apply your geological knowledge to something that's more diversified, looking to how you're going to transition potentially from oil and gas. Really, like, the company that I'm involved with, we do everything. So oil and gas is a skill set that can be easily transitioned into just about anything. So you're learning that by being here. I really encourage you to look into the Energy Minerals Division or any of the AAPG programs or committees or divisions, and it's a great time. So enjoy the talk tonight and reach out, and hope to, stay in contact with all of you. So that's all I have to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mike. So tonight, I just want to say that this is an amazing moment where there are huge opportunities. And we're looking at a point where companies are making large acquisitions of production, and they're all seeking to improve the ultimate recovery of reserves and control costs. And I don't know if any of you have looked at diversified energy and just the fact that they're acquiring the properties of lots of companies, several companies. I think there are at this point quite a few, with the goal of actually revitalizing a lot of the old production and cleaning it up. So accomplishing two or three things: profitability, of course, but also getting the last amount of oil out and doing it in a clean way, and using science and technology to see what exactly can be done and where are we. And so the four people that are speaking today are basically, we're going back to our roots in a certain way, because we're looking at the reservoir, we're looking at innovative technologies that are making what was not possible possible. And that is getting the last amount out of old wells, of old reservoirs, and doing it in a way that's clean and efficient and paves the way for the future. So I'd like to introduce John Holbrook, who's at TCU, and he'll talk to us a little bit about the importance of reservoir characterization and why reservoir modeling matters now more than ever. You're muted, John.
I say you're sharing screen with me?
I made you a co-host, so you should be able to.
I can indeed. Okay. So, let's see. Well, hold on a second. Oh, shoot.
Looks good.
Oh, it's working?
Yes.
You're seeing my slide. Okay, wonderful then. Well, first off, thank you very much for inviting me, Susan. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the topics that I've played with for a while. My background, of course, is I've largely been involved in upstream characterization of reservoirs for most of my career, and heavy duty into fluvial deltaic and sequence stratigraphy type things. As I often say, I'm fundamentally a plumber. So what I'm going to do is I've spent a lot of time lately talking about geothermal and other alternative and sustainable energy sources. So I'm going to try to sort of blend those together a little bit. Give me just a second here. They put my office on this crazy motion sensor and the light keeps going out. All right. Still, I think I'm going to talk about it. There we go. Dang it. Hold on a second, Susan. Sorry about this.
No problem.
It doesn't want to, it's there, it went. All right, that just advanced, right?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, it's working. So first off, a little bit about geothermal, just a little reminder for everybody. I talked about this earlier, so just bringing everybody back to here. It's about drilling holes and pumping hot water through rocks. And so it's technology we're familiar with. We have injector and extractor systems, and we end up injecting cold water. It heats up. We pull out hot water. We harvest it for power. One thing I want to point out, though, that's really critical about taking this next step in geothermal, when we think about what we've done so far at this point, convection versus conduction. Rocks are not very conductive. Heat doesn't escape very well through solid rock. Convection is what we're really playing, the game we're really playing here with geothermal. Water is what we're trying to move. So the more water you can move, the better. The water will heat back up a little bit with the rocks, but you don't want to depend on the fact that the core of the earth is really hot and it'll eventually get here. It won't. So it's water we're really talking about. Also, the other thing I want to point out is about carbon sequestration. Obviously, this is another moving part that's very big with us. And I want to point out, besides the simple matter of disposing carbon, we can repurpose carbon dioxide as a working fluid in geothermal. So we want to look at the potential of being able to couple those systems as we're working. So just a quick review of the different types of approaches we do with wells, whether we're doing it with carbon or we're doing it with carbon dioxide, or we're doing it with water as the working fluid. But first off, there's the simple basic idea of you have injection and extractor wells, and you use those, and you depend on fractures. And so you'll largely fracture the place with fracking technology. The other option, of course, is the sedimentary, one we mostly use in sedimentary basin, where we're looking at injectors and extractors, and we're looking at the connectivity between the different units. So we're looking at reservoir bodies and how well they're connected, and we're connecting flow paths between producers and injectors. Then in this case, though, the producer is for hot water or hot carbon dioxide, whichever game we're playing. The other approach that we use a lot of times in this is something that is something we're perfectly capable of doing, but we don't tend to do this. It's something we call a huff and puff. And so you can use the same well as both the injector and the extractor. You usually try to set up a vertical circulation pattern if you're going to do that, whereby that you're injecting at a lower depth, extracting at a higher depth, and you're circulating at the bottom of the hole through the same well. Okay, the other moving part here that I want to point out when it comes to wells is just the recycler. There's a lot of wells out there. So there's a going question as to how effectively we can recycle existing wells where we already know the geology, they're already proven and tested, and we can use them for.
I was going to go over in.
Hello? Yeah, we can either use them as a means of using carbon sequestration, or we can use them for geothermal. And then the last one I want to talk about here is the idea of the earth battery, looking at the earth as a storage medium. So we're talking here about injecting hot water into the ground and actually storing heat in the ground as a way to store large megawatt scale amounts of power in the earth using geothermal. Okay, so what do we know? Well, first off, this I think is the biggest thing that's the real pivot for us when it comes to thinking about especially geothermal, but also carbon sequestration, is we're going beyond the simple idea of production. Where we're basically trying to get oil and gas out of the ground. So in the case of carbon capture and sequestration, you're thinking in terms of the wells as disposal unit. Commercial geothermal, you're thinking of it as a mining operation. You're literally mining heat from the ground. In earth battery, you're thinking about the wells and the subsurface as a storage media. So we've got a multi-dimensional way of thinking about what we're doing with the subsurface that's emerging with these new approaches. So what do we already know? Well, first off, the good news about doing all this is we have had a lot of experience with these things, even though it wasn't directly aimed at these things. So for instance, we know a lot about heat in the ground. Talk to the SAGD people They're injecting steam into the ground in large quantities and using it to release the bitumen. And so one of the things about that, hanging around with that crowd, I've done a little work with them off and on, and they think very hard about seals and being able to control the actual steam chamber and the actual thermal body that they're creating. So that's going to be something we're going to need to think about in an earth battery situation. Also, something else we think about a lot is thief zones. The idea that we start pumping and we start drawing water in that we don't want when we're trying to produce petroleum. But the same principle will hold here, but we call it thermal breakthrough. What you're doing is you're trying to pump, but you end up having a fracture system, but all the water is going through the same cracks. So you're not harvesting heat, you're just circulating cold water. And of course, that's not going to do you much good if you're trying to dispose large amounts of carbon either. That said, though, what we also have done is had a lot of experience with injector and extractor in the secondary recovery world. So this is very transferable technology when we start talking about geothermal harvesting. also spent a lot of time, and I've spent a lot of my career looking at things about heterogeneity and connectivity. We know those reservoirs are not always well behaved. They're heterogeneous at several levels. We have very, very fine scale permeability variation we have to think about when we're moving fluids through it. And we have larger scale variation, mud drapes and so forth, and baffles and barriers. And then at the connectivity level, we worry a lot and think a lot, and we have thought a lot about how reservoirs connect up and why they do. So in a lot of respects, what we're doing with these new technologies is same old, same old. We're looking at moving fluids through the subsurface or storing, extracting fluids. What's different is this. What works best? In this case, what we're doing is we're now trying to repurpose the subsurface for a way to harvest heat, a way to store large amounts of CO2, maybe ways to store large amounts of heat. So in this case, the question quickly becomes, what sort of a reservoir do you want? Do you want if you're trying to dispose of large amounts of fluid, very often we like something like the Ellenberger, and the bigger the caves down there and the bigger the macro porosity, the better. But for the same token, though, when we're talking about geothermal, you're talking about spreading fluids out and moving fluids over large areas. Do you want a more complex plumbing, or do you want something like up here in the Argentina example, or do you want something like Zion, where you have just a very large porous media? And of course, the other thing is we're talking about fractures. And we've learned a lot about fractures and how that plays. Fractures are very big in geothermal. So I think the thing I would leave you with in my little short piece of this is just simply saying, we don't know exactly what we want just yet, because we haven't put a lot of these things into motion. What we do know is there's things we already know that are going to be very useful. But what we don't know just yet is once we start monetizing things like carbon sequestration and geothermal, what are going to be the best reservoirs? What are going to be the best approaches? So new frontiers in modeling await. And with that, I will turn it back over to you, Susan.
Thank you. Oh, that was great. That's a lot of information in just a little bit of time. So it's wonderful. So at this point, I'd like to go ahead and turn the platform over to Igor Kuvaev, who's going to talk about what you may not know about drilling and geosteering now.
Thank you, Susan. So let me share my screen. Okay, so yes, so I would like to talk about, I would say, geosteering in general, given the time constraints. I mean, it's going to be very short and quick introduction, and some ideas on importance of geosteering for the upcoming transition. And interestingly enough, John in his presentation, he had a few horizontal wells there already, which kind of indicates that potentially, I totally agree with the statement that we probably didn't know how exactly we're going to do all of that, but potentially there is an opportunity or there is a need to drill more horizontal wells or to reuse existing horizontal wells that were previously drilled for oil and gas. And in my opinion, in both of those cases, we do need geosteering, and there are certain reasons why. So okay, so very basic concept, very basic, like one geosteering on one slide type of explanation. What do we have from? Why do we need it, and what do we get as a result of the geosteering? So our goal, at least as of today, when we drill horizontal wells, and most of the oil and gas fields worldwide, and actually geothermal fields, there are not many of them, but they are also developed with horizontal wells. And when we drill horizontal well, of course, there are lots of details and specifics to that, but the most important task would be to follow a certain geological formation geology is the key word here, geological formation that was identified by the geologists during the planning stage. So geologists identified a certain formation based on the most likely petrophysical parameters where we have most of the oil, and we have to follow that formation during the geosteering procedure. And our goal as a geosteers is to monitor the data that we receive during the drilling procedure. Most likely it's going to be in North America, it's going to be gamma ray only. Everywhere else in the world is probably going to be much more than that. But generally speaking, we need to look at log data, survey data, and come up with so-called Gstr interpretation. And Gstr interpretation, again, trying to simplify it as much as I can, it's where we are in the geological formation. And later on, I will show you that the most certain information that we get out of the geosteering is actually the geology, where we are in the geological formation. As far as the vertical placement of the lateral, how deep it is from like ZV coordinate or TVD subsea coordinate, we're not that certain. But what we're certain about is the geology. Now, there are lots of discussions on the importance of geosteering and why it's important. So I know many companies internally, they've done similar work. We've done it with the public data on our side. So basically, because of the nature of US unconventional drilling, we've got lots and lots of wells, lots and lots of data available. And that data allows us to pull some great statistical results. So we used our internal analytical tool here and Canadian public data, lots of wells drilled in different formations, and we basically analyzed whether the geosteering is important. And yes, it is important. So the wells that statistically are better geosteered, better in target, they are statistically giving us much better 12 months cumulative production rate. So that is proven, and I'm sure a lot of other companies, they came up with the same result. Now, going into kind of challenges, and that's probably one of the key challenge to the geosteering procedure, and key challenge to utilization of geosteering data for any possible modeling or for any future development. So it's called Ellipse of Uncertainty. So with especially with modern wells, getting deeper and longer, the uncertainty of our survey position is getting higher and higher. So I don't want to name a specific numbers, but it's quite substantial number. So basically, in a very simple words, when you're looking at the wellbore and the survey spreadsheet tells you that the depth of the survey is, say, 3,000 or, well, 3,000 is not realistic, 9,000 feet TVD, it's the estimate. It could be much, well, substantially higher, it could be substantially lower. Same, even worse than that, corresponds to left and right. Left and right could be also substantially wrong based on the survey spreadsheet. And there are not many ways how we can fix that. So there is always going to be an uncertainty. So when you drill horizontal well, most likely you will always be wrong. Now, as I said before, the solution to that, or at least a substantial component that can help us here, is geology, and geosteering specifically. Because yes, we don't know that the exact vertical position of the wellbore, but we do know where it is in the formation, whether it is in the layer, how far away it is from the top of the reservoir, how far away it is from the base of the reservoir, based on the results of the geosteering. So this is one of the examples that I really like. It's two fairly long horizontal wells drilled basically towards each other. And the tolls of these horizontal wells are quite close. And these tiny green lines are the top and base of the formations based on the geosteering outcome. So you can see that both of those wells were geosteered quite well. Majority of the well is in the formation, and the wells were pretty much, especially at the toe, they were geosteered very close to the top of the reservoir, top of the target zone. Now, you can see that there is a very substantial difference between those two wells on like depth scale, on TVD subsea scale. And that happened for one simple reason. It's our cone of uncertainty. So yes, ellipse of uncertainty. So yes, we know exact position those wells relative to the geology, because geosteering is kind of a relative science. We always estimate the position of the well relative to the geology, but we don't know. I mean, this well to the left could give us the right, correct TVD subsea position, or the well to the right could do that. We are not sure about that, and honestly speaking, there are not many ways to fix that, but maybe we don't even need that. So with those projects, especially when we're drilling, lots of wells side by side, or, there are some concepts, I guess most of us know about, that is a U-shaped well drilled in Canada. Those types, geosteering is essential. So geosteering can give you much more accurate understanding of the position of the wellbore in the formation versus just pure vertical calculation based on the survey measurements. And another sort of direct implication of the geosteering, especially when it comes to the existing data, historical data, is when companies are trying to build like more like a three-dimensional full field model based on all the horizontal wells drilled in the area. If horizontal wells, if we're taking only the landing points and we're not considering the geosteering of the horizontal well, we can end up with a very inaccurate structure map and very inaccurate geosteering, very inaccurate geological model. So it's very important to utilize the geosteering data, again, with the understanding that geosteering is relative to the geology, and survey points always have a certain error, which could be quite high, especially towards the top of the well. So geosteering is essential if we are just drilling horizontal wells, especially if it's a multi-well drilling project where wells are drilled side by side, or when we're utilizing existing wells to better understand how we can reuse those existing data and existing wells drilled for some other future purposes. So that's it from my side.
That's really practical and interesting. I really appreciate that, Igor. So we'll hold questions until the end. I'd like to introduce now Dr. Qiang Wang, and he's the co-founder of NewWell, and is excited about the new technology that he's presenting, and it has direct implications for making, for revitalizing old wells, especially ones that you might discover by drone or whatever. At any rate, welcome.
Thank you, Susan. Let me share my screen.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you, Susan, for the introduction, and thank everyone for still be here tonight. I'm going to introduce a little bit about NewWell's seeding material and talk about how it can help unconventional reservoir development. First of all, what is our material? It is basically a liquid on the surface. After it is pumped down into the formation, the temperature will trigger a cross-link reaction. So it turns from liquid to a rubbery solid, which acts as a sealing. So this sealing material, once it hardens to the solid, it is resistant to formation water and acid. And also this is a water-based system. It's quite different from other materials like epoxy resin. This has a more reliable reaction. Well, this material is applicable all the way from 85 to 350 degrees. So how does the sealing mechanism works? Well, this is a cartoon to show the material after it pump into the fracture. It basically forms this rubbery plug, it's subject to direction of pressure. On this side, it is a pore pressure, and on this side, it is exposed to the bottom hole pressure inside the well bore. So because of the material, it is elastic and rubbery. So these two pressure basically push the material on this direction, expand it, and that's how it works as a sealing material. Because of the sealing mechanism, the sealing doesn't really depend on the formation type. It basically more use a mechanical property. And also, we can say that the sealing capability or the differential pressure it can hold can be controlled by the penetration depth of this plug. The deeper we pump this material into the fracture, the higher it can hold the differential pressure. So in the lab, we have a custom-made equipment. We basically measure what is the differential pressure this material could hold with 1 foot of penetration. We believe this material is very useful in unconventional reservoir development. For unconventional reservoir, many of the challenges, especially for developing field, which means there are already some wells drilled and there were already some fracture pre-exist there. So when you try to further develop such kind of field, there are a couple of challenges directly related to the legacy fractures which were already there. For example, parent-child interaction is basically when you frac the child well, it tended to grow into the parent fracture. Another challenge is refrac. Many times, the well bore, although we have done a lot of, we have created a lot of fractures, still a lot of reservoir was left untreated. If we try to do refrac in the same well bore, naturally all the fluid and proppant, they would tend to be pumped into the old fracture rather than to create some new fracture. So if we can use the sealing material to block the old fracture, then it's good. It'll be more effective for refrac. Another example is water production. Since for the horizontal wells, for each lateral section, we have created hundreds, if not thousands, hundreds of fractures. So if just a few fractures, like 3 to 4, is flooded by water, then the water will flood into the whole horizontal section, and that will hinder the production of hydrocarbon. So a sealing material can help to block the fractures that were flooded by water, so the rest of the fracture can produce. Another challenge would be lost circulation during drilling. The old fractures, they have been produced and depleted. So when you try to drill an offset well and intersect with the old fracture, that can be a source for fluid loss. A sealing material will also help in this situation. Also, the sealing material can be also used to fix a leaked casing, which is actually happened quite often, especially when people do like a multi-stage of fracture. During the frac, if there's a leakage in the well bore, people have to first fix that leakage before they can keep on going with hydraulic fracture treatment. So our sealing material is engineered to have several properties. For example, for one property, the cross-link rate or the hardening time can be controlled. In this chart, in this test, the X here is the time in minutes. The Y is apparent viscosity, because when the material is start to cross-link, the viscosity increase. So we can use the change of the viscosity to monitor how fast it cross-link. And the Y-axis here is the temperature. For this set of tests, we do all the tests at 250 degrees. By changing the recipe, we can control the cross-link time, like the hardening time from like 20 minutes all the way to more than 200 minutes. This is a very useful property because, you know, different well bonds, they have different volume and the pumping rate. So we need to change the recipe to match the pumping time. Another property of the sealing material is it can, the sealing can last quite long and it can withstand multiple pressure cycles. We test this by using a custom developed equipment. The core of the equipment is basically a 1 foot long tubing, and the ID of the tubing is about 0.6 inch, which is actually quite close to, you know, the perforation holes. We fill this tubing with our sealing material, and then we apply, we keep it at the desired bottom hole pressure we want to test, and then we apply pressure at the inlet of this tubing. If the material cannot hold that pressure, then we will start to see pressure leak out from the outlet of this tubing. Here is a test results. This test lasted for 35 days. This is the time in X. The Y here is a pressure, and this Y-axis here is temperature. During the whole 35 days, we keep this sample at 250 degrees, which is shown in the blue code here. And then we just periodically apply pressure at the inlet of the tubing. And this is the day 1 test. We enlarge it so to show the details. You can see that when we apply 5,000 PSI on the inlet side of the tubing, we didn't see any pressure bleed out to the outlet. This is the same, and then we just raise pressure up and down for many pressure cycles. And at day 35, when we apply 5,000 PSI at the inlet, the material can still hold. We also, here is a case study. This is a well we did in Beaver County, Oklahoma. It's a vertical well. This well has been hydraulically fractured in a 2-stage treatment at a depth 7,600 feet and 7,700 feet. This well has been produced for 17 years, so it's a quite depleted reservoir. There's a very fast fluid leak off before we treat the well. The bottom hole static temperature for this well is 144 degrees. So when we do the treatment design, we considered all these conditions. For one, we use some diverter before the pumping, so we can control the fluid loss. And then, because the reservoir temperature is not very high, we use accelerators to speed up the settling rate. We also pumped diverter during when we pump in the infill seal, because it's a 2-cluster perforation, so we want to make sure our sealing material, which is called infill seal, would be distributed throughout the perforation clusters and the 70+ perforation holes. This is a quick slide to show the whole process. This is the squeeze treatment time chart. Before the infill seal reach the perforation, reach the fracture, it was very easy to pump. But once it enters the fracture, so since the material itself is a viscous fluid, we immediately see pressure increase because it requires pressure to squeeze into the perforation, the fractures. And then after that, the whole treatment is more like a cementing squeeze job. Just squeeze the fluid in after the pressure drop a little bit, then increase the pressure again to keep on squeezing. Basically squeeze and let pressure bleed off a little bit and squeeze again. So we did this for a couple of times. Then we waited for a period of time to let the material hardening, and then we just use a blade drill bit, a very simple blade to drill the material out. And this picture here, the white stuff in my hand, it is the drilling cut. By the way, this material, after it cross-links, the density is about 1.2, so it's very close to water. So we have no difficulty circulating the drill cut out of the well bore. And this is a result of that pressure test. We can show that the material at the surface, it is tested to about 2100 psi. Since the reservoir is depleted, which converted to about 5,000, more than 5,000 psi differential pressure. That's how much it can hold in this test. Well, this is basically the summary. Quickly summarize the infill material. It is a liquid. It hardens to a rubbery material at downhole condition, downhole temperature, and it can go into very small cracks and form a very reliable sealing. That's all my talk. Thank you for listening.
Oh, thank you. It's really fascinating. I can't tell you how much I appreciate this and the other presentations as well. It's really intriguing. So I'm going to invite Bryan McDowell to share the platform right now as well. And also, I just wanted to mention that you will be receiving a link with a link, or an email with a link to the recording, so you can watch it again. And also, I'm not going to enable live transcription because it eats up a lot of bandwidth, and the times that I've done it, it's frozen, frozen Zoom, so it's too risky. So anyway, so thank you, and Bryan, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I just saw, it looks like the Astros just won 9-1.
Hey,
All right.
and tonight's a meteor shower too.
Okay, I'm going to share on this screen over here. So it looks like I'm looking off the sides because I'm looking at the slides, everybody. Okay, can y'all see those all right?
Yes.
Okay, so mine's going to be short and sweet today. What I'm going to talk about is just integrating old data in new ways. So as far as the technology side of this, I'm not really going to go into drilling or modeling or anything like that. What I'm just going to focus on is strictly the data, okay? I'm just going to give you a little background. You know, who's Sabata? My partners are probably giggling right now. Ultra lean startup is probably an exaggeration. There's just a handful of us. We actually bought one of the oil and gas libraries out here based in Midland, Texas. And what we're doing is we're actually focused on bringing modern data solutions to small oil and gas companies. So the type of data skills, Python, cloud computing, all this sort of things that have typically up to this point been limited to the majors. You know, we do a little bit of the consulting side and also do data services. Now, the reason I want to mention this is where we kind of got into this space is this last December, we actually bought one of the oil and gas libraries out here in Midland. There's historically three: the Midland Energy Library, Subsurface Library, and another one called the Petroleum Research Center. With that, we ended up with about 500,000 paper well logs and over 1 million paper completion cards. So think about the really, really old school DST data, drilling reports, on all that good stuff, right? Well, once we actually got this thing, it's like, all right, we're trying to figure out what all actually overlaps, right? I'm 32, spent most of my experience in unconventionals, right? So a lot of this kind of older historical data really just hasn't been leveraged that much in the industry. Well, with, I think, COVID, what we're seeing is like a re-diversification of the industry. Kind of, we're also obviously still seeing shales and horizontals and stuff still going forward. But what I'm seeing is that a lot of folks that have gotten laid off, or frankly just have better opportunities, are kind of leaving that side and kind of going back to re-diversification verticals, whether that's tight gas sands, especially right now with prices, whether that's old water floods and so on and so forth. Well, anyways, if you start getting this paper data, we're really trying to see like what all is out there. And the deeper and deeper and deeper that we kind of went down the rabbit hole in this, anybody that spent any sort of time in an exploration group or business development group, I think has had this experience where, say, a company says, hey, someone's approached us with like a 50,000 acre package, and it's somewhere out in who knows where, North Dakota, West Texas, doesn't really matter, right? You've got 10 days to put together an evaluation on this, how much money you want to spend for it, and do you think it's worth anything what we can drill, right? Well, if you go out there, what you'll see is that kind of the existing model is that you have this huge amount of data, but it's all totally disparate, right? At the center of this, you have the regulatory agencies, and you have individual operators have a piece. You have private collections. It's pretty amazing how many private individuals have a huge library just in their garage, especially out here in West Texas. You've also got the energy libraries, as well as universities, and obviously the service companies. There's plenty of data shops like that, right? What we've been trying to do, and I think it's not just for us, but what really the industry needs to move towards is get away from this kind of disparate data sets and trying to get to where you essentially have like a central thing to actually bring all these things together. And this is really where kind of our bread and butter is. Now, I'm not trying to plug us here so much. What I am trying to push with this, though, especially going back to Dr. Holbrook's talk, if we are as an industry or a significant part of the industry going to be pivoting towards geothermal or towards carbon sequestration or towards hydrogen storage or things like this, where you're going into these older depleted fields, it is really, really eye-opening how many wells that are out there that are not in the public record or are in the public record incorrectly. And going after this, what we call dark data, which is my next slide here, is really, in my opinion, is the only way there, right? It's not only about characterizing the reservoir, but it's also about finding hazards, right? Especially some of the stuff, you know, we've got major fields out here in the Permian that are 3,000 foot deep or even lower, right? You go start pumping in a ton of CO2 in this, trying to store it. You can have some major issues really quickly where, you know, P&A workflows were not nearly as good 50 or 75 years ago. You know, people just stuffing telephone poles down the hole versus actual cement, right? And this is really where we're trying to get into. Okay. Now, I mentioned dark data, and I would say this is the bigger problem than the disparate data sets. A lot of folks are starting to put those data sets out online. They're starting to digitize it. But the problem is a lot of times these things don't match up. But more often than not, people are doing very, very low level of indexing. I would argue you go and look at most oil and gas libraries. There's an enormous amount of them out there. Most of them don't even have a list of the data that they have in house. Okay. And when I'm talking, and I just want to kind of show you the size of this, and apologize my little selfie video. This is actually us packing up this library, right? So we bought the third biggest library in Midland, right? Not the first and not the second. Okay. This right here is packed up, and my business partner's on the call right now. Spent about 3 weeks packing up almost 70,000 pounds of paper. Okay. 1.5 million documents of stuff. And a lot of this has never been seen before. We have one copy of it. It's the only copy that exists in the world, right? And there's tons of this stuff out there. Okay. If you're going, I think really the future of this in the industry is if it's getting harder and harder to permit new wells, like we're seeing, say, the Rockies, especially, and really in Colorado, the better way to do this is to go out and you can go in existing wells and try to get a little extra out of it, right? Okay. So why is all this relevant? Kind of circle back to this whole, like the new trends and the pivoting and everything is it's easier than ever to leverage manpower. Right. And the reason I say I'm putting this in here is because we are a very small shop. And out of that, we manage over 1 million well logs digitally, 500,000, 1.5 million paper. And it's all because of two things. It's because of programming and it's because of cloud computing. Right. By programming, I'm talking about the Python scripts. I think most of us have taken at least a couple lessons since COVID when we were stuck at the house. Right. But it's not just about the scripting. When you get to this sort of scale or this sort of volume, you have to store it, you have to compute, you have to do all these different things, right? We are not affiliated with any of these organizations or these businesses. I just want to put these up there because I think those of us that have gotten laid off over the last year and a half and found ourselves without an IT team for the first time in quite some time, it's really hard to kind of find these products and kind of work your way through the system. I'm not an IT professional. I'm an engineer and I'm a geologist, right? And my partners are the same. And going out and finding a workable solution to where you can scale these sort of things is really important. And frankly, it's not very straightforward. And it's something I would say that's kind of new. That's finally to the point now where kind of everyday Joe Schmo can actually go do it. Now, I'm just going to put this on here again, just because from a practical background, I just want to kind of show with everybody else that is kind of this pivot. You know, the products we typically use, this Ignite, this is a really great software for network drive as a essentially a replacement for a network drive and storage. We use Amazon Web Services for a lot of stuff. They have a pretty big oil and gas thing. We store all of our well logs on there. Traditional servers. Apparently, we were actually one of the first companies to actually host a Petra license through a cloud server. As simple as that is, and as mature as that industry is, that shows you how far behind we are as an industry. Okay. You also have the managed servers, which is what we do all of our SQL servers off. And then Azure, we use for our virtual machines. I have right now 8 different desktops pushing 6 terabytes of well log data to AWS, and it cost me a whopping $1.52 an hour. Okay. That's, I mean, it's 5 years ago, that sort of thing. I think at least me personally, or a lot of individuals would have been, I wouldn't say impossible, but very difficult, you know. And I think going forward, you know, I'm going to leave y'all kind of with my final thoughts here, is that we need to really leverage these tools that are going out there. We can do some really incredible things, not just on the storage side and the coding side, but even like image processing and stuff, and trying to tackle these dark data sets that have really been left behind. And as we pivot towards these non-traditional oil and gas stuff, where we're pumping a lot of pressure downhole, right, we need to be more cognizant of this historical data, where it could really come and bite us on an environmental standpoint. And with that, like I said, short and sweet. Appreciate y'all's time, and more than happy to answer any questions if y'all have them.
Oh, that's great. Really, really enjoyed that. And oh my gosh, so many different questions that come to mind. One that definitely comes to mind, I have a barrage of information from my dad and all that. And so I relate to that. But this idea that you were mentioning about how errors get passed along, could you address that?
Yeah, so I think one of the best examples, and this is one I feel like very few people realize, you know, most, if you go and look at the Railroad Commission, what's the number one way we identify wells is API numbers, right? Well, API numbers really weren't started until the 60s, right? And they didn't, and they actually, the Railroad Commission actually didn't even start applying them to the 70s. So if you actually go out and look for old historical stuff out on the Railroad Commission's website, and I'm sorry, I'm using the Permian Basin example, it's really, really difficult to kind of pull these things together. Now, if you're at a big shop and you afford to pay $100,000 a year for some, you know, for data, well, then, you know, you don't really have as big of an issue, because that's really kind of the quality of your vendor, right? But if you're actually, say, at one of these smaller shops, where I was actually just looking at the Stripper Well Association, 8% of all production in the U.S. comes from stripper wells, but they make up 70% of all the productive wells in the business, right? Regardless of whether if the major operator going out here and trying to do this carbon sequestration is doing this, you still have to do due diligence with your neighbors, right? And your neighbors should be doing due diligence on yourself, right? If most of these stripper wells and these smaller wells are coming from small operators, it's really, really tough to do due diligence against, you know, compare against, say, a $20 or $50 billion company, right? Those little errors like that, even just spotting wells in the wrong location, or realizing there's a DST out there, or a completion card that said, you know, lost circulation in a zone that no one knew existed. I mean, that can have huge implications. You're going back to Dr. Holbrook, you know, with these breakout zones and stuff like that. You start pumping a lot of pressure and volumes downhole. So I hope that answers your question a little bit.
Well, definitely. And also it makes me think about like putting the puzzle pieces together. Let's say you decide to go back to some old wells and you want to refurbish them, pull the pipe. But I wonder, like, Dr. Wang, if you could speak about how, if somebody get some old leases, how they might be able to do that. You mentioned the vertical well in Oklahoma.
Yes. Since, well, I would suggest that first of all, you need to identify the problem, right? For example, if you have like either a casing problem or a water production problem, things like that, you kind of need to combine maybe true logging with how to say the local geological data to identify the problem of your well. Then you can come up with a solution. That would be my suggestion. For example, seal specific zone, or seal the leakage, or perf or frac a new zone, things like that. But I would say diagnose first, solution second.
That's interesting. So Igor, do you ever use geosteering for when you're going into old fields?
Interestingly enough, most of the, if you look at all the conventional fields and what is happening with them right now, pretty much on any place on Earth, Alaska, Middle East, Africa, whatever it is, what is happening, operators, they are re-entering all the vertical / deviated wells and drill a horizontal sidetracks from those certainly with geosteering. So short answer is yes, it's quite common, and it's actually quite massive. Maybe not that visible as US shales, but it's happening a lot.
It's interesting. And I guess the key to that is good characterization. Dr. Holbrook, would you like to say a few words on that?
Sorry, about what?
It's like if you're going into an old field and you're using whatever technologies you can, like geosteering, even using like deviated wells, whatever.
Yeah, well, the obvious thing about this is that there are a lot of these wells with a lot of data. Again, if you're talking about depleted fields and storing carbon, you're really asking the question, how much volume is down there? And there's records of how much had been extracted from these wells, what kind of flow rates they had. And for things like geothermal, I mean, it's heat and water. There's records of these kinds of flows. It should be a simple matter of, you think, of just mining around and saying, oh, this one would work. It's got the numbers. But the funny thing is, not one person yet has done it.
That's super interesting. So I noticed that there are quite a few people in the audience. Please chime in. And Bryan, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to follow up with John's comment on the production side. I mean, I think a lot of stuff, we're get kind of down in the weeds. We mostly focus on geologic data, but obviously we pull some production data for ourselves. But the tough part is, like, you go into these conventional fields. I mean, like let's say the Yates field, right? Started in the 1940s. Texas, everything is allocated by lease, still is for oil wells today, but then gas wells are allocated by the well. Well, then you go to Colorado, but you can get records going back for quite some time, right? Not all the way to the 40s, but quite a while back. Then you go up to Colorado. Colorado doesn't even have production available publicly before, I believe it's 1999. So some of these really good Middle Darcy fields, it's the state line faults. And I don't have my map up here. If y'all get a chance, we got kind of on our website. You can really see how diligent different states are just by actually plotting all that data up there. And I think some areas like the Rockies, which tend to have really good regulatory bodies as far as data wise, I think it's going to be pretty easy. But I think places like Texas and even Oklahoma, where we got a lot of volume you could put away, there's a lot of risk in there too, because they're historically been drilled a lot longer as well. So anyways, just add some color to that. It gets pretty interesting pretty quick once you really start to dive in.
Oh, definitely. And then discovering logs that other people aren't, I mean, okay, people are required to release some of the logs, but other logs they aren't. And so finding logs that are kind of like you said, the dark data, that can really provide some good insight.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many completion cards I have in our cabinet out right now that have 5 DSTs, 3 of which have an oil show in them. And then at the top of the card, it says plugged and abandoned from like
Exactly.
1950, right?
Yeah, it wasn't
I have
economic.
thousands of them, right? I mean, this is the thing is like, even if you didn't want to go in and re-drill them and stuff like that, you know, some of these where they're like just really great water wells on the DSTs, that's, I mean, especially like we're talking about sequestration, right? You need deliverability, right? It doesn't really matter what the fluid, and I shouldn't say it doesn't matter, but you know, with the fluid that's in there, you need deliverability over everything, right? Well, if you've got a really great saltwater well, you know, that drilled in the 1950s with some DSTs and some good pressure and flow rates behind it. Well, to me, that's a pretty good place to start, you know, maybe finding some zones that were left behind. So there's a lot of ways to leverage this old stuff that I think up to this point hasn't really been done, because I mean, it's tough, frankly.
Well, it is, but like imagine in the situation where you're hired by a fund or a family office or something that's going around and like purchasing mineral interests. This is where this information is just absolutely invaluable.
Yeah, I 100%. Yeah, that's our, I'd be honest, like we do a lot of consulting stuff, but actually probably our main people we talk to are actually mineral shops more than anything, because they care about it, mostly because you have to move fast, right? If you're an operator, you got everything there. But, you know, just to show you a little quick example, and then I'll stop. You know, this is just kind of a quick thing. This is out on our website. This is mostly public data, just to show you how much is out there. This is about 20 different websites that we've pulled and put into one thing. And it's honestly only about a quarter of what's out there. But you see, you know, this pink here, these are actually samples from the BEG, cores and cuttings. It's just really hard to find this sort of stuff. You see a lot of the Railroad Commission stuff. These are all well logs from all the different states and stuff. But it's even amazing, like how you go from state to state. You know, New Mexico only publishes TIFF files, and Kansas only publishes LAS files, right? Which is great. You go to Texas, they don't hardly publish anything, right? You know, it's pretty amazing, you know, I think that's going to be the real challenge on a lot of these things is actually just getting the data together, you know. Obviously I have bias in that and, you know, confirmation bias, but, you know, food for thought.
Questions? Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead,
Sean. I saw 2 comments in the chat section about the saline material, so I would want to address those questions.
Oh, good. Yes.
The first one is from Miss Gradis. She asked if I'm curious if this is more like a gel or more like a cementous material. This saline material is kind of in between. First of all, like most of the gel, like cross-link gels, they are too weak to hold any differential pressure. On the other hand, cementous material is too brittle and too hard. So even if you use a cement to seal off something, after you apply pressure, it's just a piece of rock. It will break again. So the saline material we have is more like in between. It's soft, like a gel, but it's quite hard and rubbery. So it's more like you know, the tire, the rubbery. I mean, the rubber in your tire. So it's kind of in between. That's how it can on one side hold the pressure, on the other side it doesn't break that easily. The other question is from Patrick Near. He asked if is saline material something magic like a black seal we got from Home Depot? Well, this is an interesting question. I would say the idea are the same. You know, the flex seal we got from Home Depot is basically mixed 2 materials, and it reacts to form some kind of saline. But you know, that kind of material, first of all, is more based on epoxy resin. So there are 2 drawbacks that we cannot apply those kind of material for oil well, because those materials, they react at the surface temperature. So if you pump it downhole, it will react too fast. So even before you can reach the setting point, there's a great chance that it will cross-link in the well valve, and that will mess up with your treatment. The second one is this kind of material like flex seal is not water soluble. Like other things like epoxy resin or silicone gel, all those, they can harden, but probably you will notice it's very messy if you touch it, because it's not water soluble. It's very hard to clean. That causes problem in real operation, because whatever left in on your surface equipment and what the residue left in your well valve, those are very hard to clean, and that can cause future problem when you try to do more operation in the well. So that's why we develop our material to be, this material is water soluble, so it's much easier to clean. So I think those are the answers for the question. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. That's interesting. So, and that's important. I'm glad that you mentioned those points and responded to the chat questions. I noticed that Jess Cosman has said, thanks for highlighting the importance of indexing. And Jess, would you like to say something? Oh, somehow your audio is not working. Did you? Yes, that works. So Jesse, do you want to say something?
Is that better?
Yes.
Yep.
Did you want to say something about indexing and your experience?
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, excellent, good, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to thank Bryan for bringing up the idea of legacy data, and I'm working currently over in Australia, and we actually have a recognition with professional geologist group over here of professionals who work with geoinformation on indexing projects like that. So I think there's more and more recognition as we move into this digital geoinformation age that a lot of that valuable data is locked up in data that may not be digitized yet. And a lot of valuable information is, as you said, handwritten notes on the side of well completion reports. And until you've got access to some of that key data, you may not have a full understanding of the basin or the area you're working in. So I think those kind of projects and initiatives are really valuable, especially where you're delving into government data and making it accessible and visible.
Yeah, what's really interesting, what we're doing is actually part of it. We pull all the public data, just our data directory, essentially it's a yellow pages, right? So you can go and you can see what's there and blah blah, right? Anybody can do it on themselves. It's just we spent 1.5 years doing this. It's just not super easy. But I think where we're really trying to go to, and I think sets us apart that a lot of people aren't doing, is actually going after all that paper data in the libraries, and actually even in a lot of service companies and smaller operators. The hardest thing is like, how do you tackle a 2 million document repository, right? I mean, like, honestly, for us, what we've done is now we actually have QR codes. So we tag all the stuff with a QR code, and we actually just have an iPhone app, and you take a picture, and we're building out. Someone made the comment about machine learning, or actually that might've been you talking about the machine learning algorithms. And that's exactly what we're doing. We're actually, our public data set we've done is used all 800,000 rasters that we've downloaded, and we've clipped out the log header to make a training set to actually teach. We're teaching an ML, a machine learning model, to sort everything by vintage. And then once you have that, then you have the exact same template. You have the exact template for every single kind of log vintage over the last 75 years, whatever like that, right? And then you can really start leveraging these things. But at the end of the day, you have to take an image of it first. You have to, right? There's no way around that. And that is the toughest thing. because the rest of it's pretty mature, especially the handwritten stuff obviously is tough. But if it's printed and it's on a standard template, it can be automated to a certain extent, right? And that's what we're at least trying to tackle on ours. So I don't know, maybe not real sure if we're smart or stupid for trying to do this. I think for us, it's mostly a means to an end. So we're kind of better consultants. And frankly, too, is I think is just as a service, we're a bunch of data nerds, right? Is that this needs to be done, right? I mean, it's pretty amazing. It's like even like cores and cuttings that are double listed in repositories because one repository donated it to another and they never delete out their list. And then things just disappear into the ether, right? You know, and a lot of this stuff might not be that valuable. You know, it's not valuable until it is, right? And I think, at least from our standpoint, I mean, that's kind of our philosophy. Obviously, we're business, we're trying to make some money off of it as well. But part of this is just, I'm just got so tired of doing this all the time, you know, as if it feels like, you know, someone needs to step up and I guess bite the bullet. So there's I think there's a lot of opportunity out there. So.
Hey, Ryan, this is Patrick, and I'm glad you stepped up to the plate. Now, how many times you have to tilt your head 90 degrees to look at those old logs, those bottom hole pressure or temperature? Over 2 million.
Oh, yeah, a lot. So we just moved our library out of storage. We've gone through a small army of student workers. We're probably going to hire all of UT Permian Basin before within the next 6 months to go through this stuff. But, you know, the big thing is once you can get a digital record, you know, you don't have to scan the log. You just have to scan the header. You can make a lot of leeway there. So that's our thing is we index by rule and we scan and digitize by exception, right? So at least getting a catalog as simple as that is, most places don't have it. And that's really where that dark data comes in. So, and again, like I said, for traditional oil and gas stuff, there's some value, but I think really for the sequestration side, we're actually doing this for water wells and stuff too. Because again, as you start getting the sequestration, the gas storage underground, stuff like that, these hazards become really critical, you know, and the environmental stuff is not going away, right? We have to be better stewards as an industry, right? We are not getting the slack, you know, that we had 75 years ago for the better, right? But, you know,
that's a really good point. Now, John Krastinick mentioned, he said lots of geosteering horizontals for redevelopment of old vertical fields. So I don't know if John, would you like to comment on that? He may have stepped away. He looks like he's in the meeting, but well, maybe Igor can talk about exactly how that actually works. We talked about it earlier a little bit, and maybe you can elaborate a
bit. Yeah, absolutely. So it's funny enough. Many operators, they don't know of each other, but because we talk to pretty much all of them on all the continents, they do the same thing. They re-enter. Well, it's most likely it's not even re-entering because those wells are producing or injecting already, but they drill those typically it's fairly short horizontal sidetracks, and there are lots of challenges to that. First of all, because those wells are old and drilling out of those wells is not very easy all the times, but probably the most problematic one is in US shales, we got used to drill with fairly big diameters and just generally big well bores. Over there, you don't have that luxury because those old wells, they're already kind of small and tiny in diameter, and you have to re-enter with an even smaller one. So, and that puts a lot of limits on the length of the well bore and type of complete, because it's not only re-entering. In many cases, those operators, they're willing to actually do multi-stage frac of that horizontal well once it was drilled. So it adds even more limitations to the to available technologies available to them. And specifically to the geosteering, not many MW tools are capable of or have, you know, that tiny diameter to be drilled in those, to be used in those tiny well bores. So I've seen cases when operators, even though they're drilling in like oil water type of field where resistivity is crucial. As a log, they could use only gamma ray simply because there is no such tool on the market at all, at no cost. Those type of challenges are happening a lot. I think eventually we may end up with something similar in unconventional. We just have so many undrilled locations as of today, so that type of problem is far away from us. But we may be there at some point in time. But as for conventional fields, those fields, especially big ones, they've been developed, since 20s, 30s, 40s, if we're talking about Middle Eastern fields, or 60s, 70s. So they're all in fairly bad condition, and it's always quite a challenge to redevelop those.
Oh, definitely. Okay, so the big quick question is, it looks like we've kind of gone through all of the chat questions and kind of winding down. As we wind down, I'd like to know, it's so great that we have people from Australia and Asia, Latin America. So in the chat box, if you're from Australia or Asia Pacific, type something in the chat box. How many of you are here from that part of the world? And if you're from Latin America, let us know as well. Which countries are you from or dialing in from? And we have people from the Middle East. So, oh, good. Perth, Western Australia. Excellent. I think we have, I know we have some people from, Colombia. I know we have some people from Mexico that have dialed in, Japan. Indonesia, cool, nice, welcome. So very exciting. So as people are typing in their answers, I'd like to welcome and invite Gretchen to say a few words again. Philippines, nice.
Yeah, Susan, this is just great. What an interesting set of talks, and just the sense of community as we're chatting and listening and asking questions is wonderful. And that's one of the things that motivates me every day as part of AAPG. And I think it's part of why Aramco was happy to sponsor this series of pivoting events. I really enjoyed the technical exchange and the questions and the comments. And so thank you everyone so much. And I'll hand it back to you, Susan.
Okay, well, thank you. And I do want to recognize Aramco again for generous sponsorship of the entire series, and also sponsorship of our AAPG Academy. We'll have those coming as well. And, oh, Japan, nice, it's warm. And so we'll have some events coming up that are having to do with petroleum systems. Also, we're kind of getting into the fundamentals of the science again. And we'll also continue to showcase technology. So we'll just have a wide variety, and that's the whole point. I also would like to thank Srathis for providing the collaboration platform. So anyway, so thank you again, and really want to encourage everyone to check out the APG website and join a group or join a committee, join a technical interest group, and just use this opportunity to explore. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks, great presentations, great content.
Thank you.